Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Post-Military Podcast. Today, my guest is Justin Brown, who is a Navy veteran that worked in aviation electronics, and after leaving the service, Justin became involved in federal-level lobbying for veterans. One of his capstone achievements was helping write and push the post-9/11 GI Bill. Justin has also started HillVets, which is a nonprofit designed to help veterans get into the government space. On the episode today, we talk about the challenges of transition, how the military individuals can become involved in the political space, and much more. One final note, I've included timestamps in the description that highlight key moments of the episode. Check those out and see if there's any moments you want to navigate to. Finally, if you like the content, maybe give us a like, subscribe, or share on the platform you are now on. It's always greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear
That I will support and defend.
that I will support and defend
The Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Post-Military Podcast, the podcast where we give you stories and advice for transitioning into the next chapter of your life. On today is a friend, Justin Brown. Justin, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited. Sounds like you've got a great project going here and happy
Thank
to be
you.
part of it.
Thank you. I'm really enjoying the wooden walls that you have in the background. Is it like that floor to ceiling, or is it just like right where you're at?
That's pretty floor to ceiling. Yeah.
Sweet.
This is my Washington, D.C. bunker. I can't tell you where I'm at right now.
Okay,
So just
cool. We'll keep it on the down low. No one.
Most
What?
of the time people think I'm in a cabin or something because I am from Utah, so it's like not beyond the scope of reality, but I'm actually in Washington, D.C.
You told me that you split time between DC and Utah. So how much time are you normally in one and the other?
Yeah, well, I lucked out. I made an investment born and raised in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I came out to DC after my service, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But there's only one Capitol Hill, unfortunately, and as hard as I've tried to get it moved back to Salt Lake City, Utah, it's just not happening. So I think one of the negatives, frankly, of really getting involved at the national level of politics is, some might call it a positive. I guess it depends on where you're from. But like,
Yeah.
if you're from a nice place, and I'd argue if you like the outdoors, which I do, Salt Lake City is obviously kind of a mecca.
One of the best.
And you're not going to move DC. So you end up being stuck to DC in some capacity. And I bought a home there right before COVID. And I guess some would say that was lucky, but honestly, I saw how expensive the city was getting. And I was like, I got to buy a place here because it's just getting more and more expensive. And for me, it's really just home.
It's beautiful. If anyone listening has never spent time in Salt Lake City, Park City, Ogden, any of those surrounding areas, or within Salt Lake specifically, it's a beautiful area. And like you said, shoot, you got, how far away is Angel Fire from Salt Lake City?
Like Angel's Landing, like Zion National Park. Probably like, I don't know, 4 to 5 hours, depending on which.
Then you've got all those different ski areas like right there if you want to ski, and it's amazing. It's one of my favorite bicycle companies is out of Park City, a company called Baku. They make e-bikes for hunting. And really cool, like super cool engineering. Let's get into the meat of the podcast. Sure. I could talk about outdoor stuff with you. That's a whole another podcast. Let's start off at the beginning. What did you do in the military, and what did your time in the service look like?
Yeah, so I joined the Navy. I was an undesignated. I originally was offered this idea of being like an air traffic controller. I'm 17 at the time. I mean, everything. You could have made anything sound cool. I would have believed you probably. And even before that, I listened to the Army and I listened to the Navy. They were really the only two recruiters that I met with. And the Army came to me and they were like, hey, you want to blow shit up? And I was like, that sounds cool.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, I can get into that. And then the Navy was like, well, you want to go see the world? And I was like, it's 1999. And I just felt like a lot wasn't going on. And I was like, I'm going to get stuck at some fort something in the middle of somewhere. and I might as well go see the world, and maybe I get to blow some shit up too. So I joined the Navy, and at first they were offering me this air traffic control deal, and they wanted me to wait like 6 months or something, or 4 months, something like that. It was an eternity to a 17-year-old. That's a long time. And I was like, what do you have that goes next week? And they were like, well, we can give you this undesignated role, and you get in, and it's great. You start out on the flight deck, and then you get to pick whatever job you want in the Navy. And I was like, wow, that sounds great. And they were like, you even get to pick where you want to go. And I was like, sweet, let's go to Japan. They were like, well, anywhere but Japan. And I'm like, sweet, San Diego. And so I'm off to San Diego, and it all worked out though. I ended up doing my first deployment. I pretty much went undesignated. Almost means like you don't have school either. It's like they send you somewhere for like 6 weeks. In this case, it was boot camp in Pensacola, Florida for like, I don't know, like 3 or 4 weeks or something. Just a ridiculously like, here, don't walk into a helicopter rotor, it was like, but here's how to drag things. It was like, no, go.
And being in Pensacola is not bad either. Like there's worse places to be stationed as a 17-year-old for follow-on training.
Yeah, no, for sure. But it was like, the school is so short that they like, it was almost extended boot camp. They like, just, you don't get to do anything. Maybe you got like 2 nights of liberty or something. And then you're off to the fleet very quickly. And they send me to San Diego. I'm off to the fleet. I'm assigned to the USS Boxer, which is an LHD. It's an amphib, which I'd say it's like a mini aircraft carrier. It's about 2/3 of a carrier, 800 feet long. We carry 2,000 U.S. Navy ships, 2,000 Marines, and about 1,200,000 U.S. Navy ships company. And so really it's a Marine carrier. And so I'm off to the fleet. I'm still 17. And I was undesignated for my first float. And true to the Navy's word, I did work my butt off. And then I became an AT. What I did was I did one float to the Persian Gulf, and then I found I found the best air conditioning on the ship was the electronics guys. And I was like, how do I get into here? And I did the on-job training and worked my butt off, long days on the flight deck, and then went into this AC space and worked with some incredibly smart people who helped me do what I needed to do to become an aviation electronics technician. And so I ended up doing 3 deployments, one enlistment in the Navy, but it was a busy one. That first deployment, we had September 11th occur on the way back, and that changed, obviously, everything. And we thought we were going to turn around. September 11th actually happened on our way back from the Middle East between Honolulu and San Diego. And we set off the coast of San Diego for about 10 days, if my memory serves me correctly, thinking we were going to go right back because we've got the Marines, we're ready to go. And they pulled us in, which might have been worse because then we went to dry dock and became construction workers for a year. And dry dock is horrible. If you're tracking some of these military suicides that have been happening in the Navy recently, a lot of these were young enlisted sailors who were at dry dock. And it's just incredibly horrible conditions. You're frankly a construction worker. You feel like it's not what you signed up for sure. The hours are still long and everything's a mess. We fixed the boat, drop it in the water, and we deployed with the invasion force of Iraq in 2003. Took First Marines over from the West Coast and then came, dropped them off, went to Australia to do some diplomacy. And well, the Marines were busy doing whatever they were doing. And then we went right San Diego and then left again at the beginning of the following year, 2004, went right back to Iraq with more Marines, picked up the Marines we dropped off. And then I was out of the Navy.
Oh, wow.
So,
busy.
yeah.
That was a busy time. You definitely got to see a lot of the South Pacific and the Indian Ocean while you were there. So that's really cool.
Seen a lot of the Pacific Ocean, that's for sure.
I can't even imagine what it would have been like to be on a combat-ready ship when the towers went down. Like, that must have been, like, did you all know the day of? Like, were calm? Like, I know not like, I know it's not like the 1800s, but what was the comms setup like in that time in 2001? Were you all aware of it almost immediately?
Yeah, very quickly. I do wish I had like a video of the whole situation or something. It would probably feel like looking at the 1800s.
Yeah.
So the military immediately goes into ThreatCon Delta across the entire military. And we were in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Like I said, probably, I don't know. I was not, a navigator. Like I don't
Yeah.
know specifically where we were, but we were a number of days off of, we were closer to California than Hawaii. So we were a number of days off the coast of California. The way we started receiving the information, at least at my, third class petty officer, Justin Brown, doesn't need to be actually in the know, has no tactical advantage of me knowing anything. It was frankly through our TVs. It was like through the Armed Forces Network. And we started getting slides. They were slides. They were just photos. And I'm still very close with them today. They were my first class petty officers at the time. One actually lives here in DC with me. I just saw him, I see him all the time. And then they were my two closest supervisors were both from New York. And I'd never been to New York. I'm a guy from Salt Lake City. Like, and you know what the Twin Towers are, but like for me, and obviously I've been to New York now and you see the city, and I think it's a little different when you're able to visualize the significance of these buildings, right? And so obviously I never actually saw the Twin Towers, right? But I've seen the new World Trade Center, I've seen the memorial, and you can certainly kind of think about the significance of any of these major buildings being hit. But it didn't hit me the same way in terms of like immediately being like, oh my gosh, this is like so insane. At first, I was just like kind of confused. And then I think when it really hit me was because I care so much about these two guys who are frankly they mean the world to me. They're my leaders of leaders, and I was a total pain in their butt, but I'd follow them anywhere. I think it was watching their reaction. And that's when I knew that was kind of my first. We're getting it in slides. We're not getting it. There's no context here. It's not like, now let's break to any talking head on the news, their opinion of this, and let's break to Pentagon spokesman, whoever the John Kirby was of 2001. And so, yeah, I think it was watching everyone else, and then yeah, I mean, it was like the wind just like going out of the room, and then it started making a lot more sense to me.
That makes a lot of sense. It was a crazy time. So when you wanted to get out, did you always know you were only going to do one tour or like one contract, or how did the decision to get out at that point in your life come about?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think generally I knew that I was going to do one term. I knew I was not a very good high school student. I joined the Navy when I was 17. I worked to get my GED, knowing that my goal was to get the heck out of there and to join the military. I really kind of also, I'd say in my formative years leading up to the Navy, I always knew I was going to join the military. And I didn't see the value in, frankly, waiting around another year. So I was like, how do I get out of here? How do I do this? But I also knew I really wanted to go to college. And part of my deal in joining the Navy was I did get some of the scholarship money with my contract. I also just kind of felt that, and I'd kind of moved into a good role. Aviation electronics was great. I learned a ton. And obviously, you can have a career just in that field. The two bosses I just spoke of, they totally do. They still do that type of work. But I figured I might as well go to college. I've got some money for it now. And then if I want to come back to the military, maybe I explore the officer side of things or not. I mean, but I knew that option was still open. But I think I pretty much knew that I was going to put in 4 years. But I'll be honest with you, 3 Westpacks and then that dry dock of being a construction worker, I was tapped.
That's a busy 4 years. I can imagine that by then you were like, dude, I'm ready to chill a little bit. So you knew you were getting out. Did you do any kind of preparation on the front end in order to prepare yourself for that transition? Because I know that the transition space for military looks way different now than it did in 2003 when you got out.
Oh, four.
Oh, four.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
got out in June of 2004. May 31st was my last day. It was in terms of terminal leave, like my May 31st was whatever, my final day on paper. I think the ship actually pulled in from my third Westpac deployment, I don't know, mid May or something. And as soon as we pulled in, I was on terminal leave and literally walked off the ship. And I haven't seen the ship again since, which is crazy after living on it for 4 years. It's just like, haven't seen it again ever. Yeah, I think I did do a little bit of prep work. I certainly think there were challenges and gaps, and I think that's going to be true of anybody we talk to or that you talk to. But and primarily it was I knew where I was going to school. I'd enrolled, I'd been accepted, I lined up my first classes that ultimately I was pretty unsuccessful in for that first semester. But yeah, that was kind of the crux of my prep work. I knew where I was going to live, at least very temporarily, as I moved back to Salt Lake City, but it wasn't particularly comprehensive. I think things might have been different well, yeah, a few different things. One, if I'd had like the educational benefit, this is also post 9/11 GI Bill. I had the Montgomery GI Bill, which in some ways I was lucky I went back to Salt Lake City, Utah. We can get into that if you want. Long story short, there is I ended up at the University of Utah, which if you looked at the 50 most expensive state schools, if you looked at the most expensive school for each state, University of Utah was the least expensive, most expensive state school. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Ohio State was number one, being the most expensive if you looked at each state's most expensive school. And that was important because Montgomery GI Bill was a flat rate benefit. Didn't matter if I was going to Utah or Ohio State, I was getting the same amount of money. But I would argue I got an excellent value in terms of the limited resources I had to get a great degree. Whereas if I'd gone to Ohio State, I'd only be half as educated and twice as in debt. But I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Listen, hey, I didn't go there. I'm just a football enjoyer of their program. So that's even though they suck right now, which is
Football enjoyer. Yeah,
yeah.
no, and of course with post 9/11 GI Bill, veterans now, at least with state schools, that does not need to be a part of their calculus. I'm not saying it was a part of my calculus. I'm just saying I was lucky and I went home. But had home been for me, Ohio, I don't know, things might have looked different. I might have gone to not the best state school, if that all makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's a very interesting perspective because the Montgomery GI Bill there's so many people who don't access that specific GI Bill anymore. It's almost like in a couple of years when most people have never heard of the high three retirement system and everyone's like on the blended retirement system now. It's just an interesting perspective. And looking back now, you exist. We'll get into what you do now later, but you exist in this transition space kind of for veterans, and you interact with a lot of veterans who are getting out. What would be the advice you would give to you get to meet with yourself when you're getting out of the military and you know you're not going into school? What advice would you give yourself now with all of the knowledge you now have of observing veterans who have done the transition?
And you're saying that I'm not going to school.
You're not going to school because I think school is it's a very understood and structured process. And I think that's why it's so appealing to so many veterans because it's a couple of years to decompress, just go through a system that's predefined, very military like in terms of you're told where to go, you show up, you do the
Mhm.
work, you leave, kind of thing. Versus outside of school, it's way more gray area. You don't really know what the metrics are, type stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear what you're saying. That makes a lot of sense to me. I think in working with a lot of people who are transitioning, I think that one of the best things that you can do is really try to understand what makes you tick. I think really try to pay attention to your energy levels in terms of when I'm talking about this or when I'm looking at this line of work or thinking about this as a career. I get excited about it or I get passionate about it. And I think maybe even making some notes and kind of writing down some of those, how when those things hit you or interact with you, how they make you feel. And I think kind of really trying to think about where you want to kind of own a corner of the world can become really powerful. And trying to understand why I think is important as well, because sometimes I think you can run into some artificial mirrors. And what I mean by that is you might think you like something, but then when you boil it down, you're like, oh, it's because somebody else will feel like this about me, or it's your perception of like how others will react to you being in that position or that role. And I think that's often why you see various folks go down to various roles and sometimes unsuccessfully because maybe they pursue something and then if that doesn't manifest itself in the way that you were expecting, that you find that the base of that type of work was not really what you were interested in. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think really trying to find something that you care about and you're really passionate about can really propel you in a way that just taking the opportunities as they come cannot. And so sometimes that means like, hey, I hear you. I know this job pays right now, or it seems like an obvious thing to do in comparison to chasing a passion, which you really believe in, but maybe it doesn't pay anything at the front end, or it seems impossible to achieve. Those are always tough choices. And I think whenever you're chasing something you're passionate about, oftentimes people will think you're behaving irrationally. And I would argue, in many ways, maybe you're behaving incredibly rationally.
Yeah.
But that just the immediate support structures don't support that seeming like a rational choice to outsiders. To kind of bring that full circle, what I would tell the young me at that juncture is to really think about once you've kind of done that mind work, if you will, and I think really try to write things down and understand why these various things sound attractive to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, do a little bit of research, do a little bit of homework. And I encourage people all the time to come up with a list of 10 either people or places that you would want to work for. And I think a list of half and half is like great. Like 5 very specific companies or 5 very specific individuals that you would like to work for.
I want to dive into, well, there's a couple of places I want to go with it. So the first thing is just to go into that list. What in your mind, what's the difference between working for a person and working for a company? Why do you encourage both?
Yeah. And so a few reasons. One, I think companies certainly have more opportunities than an individual, right? But really, what your most likely outcome is in going down this road is you're going down a road. You have no idea where this road ends. And I'll be honest with you, the likelihood that any of those 5 people or that any of those 5 companies hire you is pretty low. But here's the good news. those people in those companies are right in the sweet spot of where you want to be. And now you're heading down the road and in the direction that you specifically want to go. And the thing about if you've got a specific vision and an idea of where it is you want to go, and you've refined it to the point of 5 people and 5 companies, then that's a pretty specific left and right. And we could come up with just about any industry and boil it down to 5 people, 5 companies. And what you're going to see is it's actually a pretty narrow community, right? Like those 5 people and those 5 companies know all the other 5 people and 5 companies kind of in that bandwidth, right? You come and meet with me, you're like, hey, Justin, I want to work on Capitol Hill in the veteran space. I pretty much know everybody that's going to have a job in this space, right? And it puts you onto the right playing field, and it starts to put you in a position where you're doing direct outreach to the people in the companies of where you want to go. The alternative to this, and what I see people doing all the time, is I've got my resume ready and I'm on XYZ website, and oh, that sounds good. That sounds good. That sounds really good. This doesn't sound good, but I'm going to apply for it anyway. And I feel like it's more of a proactive strategy, trying to go exactly where I want to go because I've done the diligence and thought about where it is I want to be, versus this kind of passive and reactive strategy.
Yeah. The issues with the passive is that you can definitely end up in something that you don't actually want to be in. And if you're not active in pursuing or finding your passions, then you're never going to know where you want to end up. And then you're just going to kind of drift. And that doesn't create a lot of happiness in someone's life when in any chapter of their life, but especially going from the military, which was high purpose employment, to if you're just passively picking something, you're going to feel very little purpose in that employment after the fact. At least that's how I perceive it. But the other thing that I thought you said that was really cool was following what you want doesn't always yield immediate results that are understood at a broad level. Like people understand money or influence or whatever, and those are generally applicable things that might result in happiness, but they're very rarely the core of what somebody is that will really tap into their feelings of fulfillment and belonging. And I think that's a really good thing to say to people, that just because it's okay to be applicable to you and it's not going to apply to others, and people might just not get that. But if you're doing what you think is the best thing, then that is the best thing.
I think that the reality of a career can move in many different directions. I think the reality right now across most industries is, I think most people would argue like the days are gone of the corporate 20-year watch wearer, right? And the gold watch, and that we live much more in a society where moving is almost encouraged, right? Like, especially at some of the leading edge corporations, like they don't really want people who've been there for 20 years, right? They're like, get here, do awesome things, learn new things, bring all the skills that you had before, and then accomplish a bunch for us. And then we know you're going to get kind of tired of what you're doing here. And we don't want you to feel like life's getting redundant and, break chalks and that the flip side to that is companies are always trying to retain their people too. But there is a real challenge to both retain people for the long term because of opportunities. But I think people also are people, and they get to the point where they want to take on new challenges. And I think, but trying to get a baseline of, and sometimes you have to check in with yourself, but I think on the leading edge of this thing, is trying to find where that motivation is, right? Like, what is something that, I can really get excited about, and why is it? What is the core value here that really makes me tick? And I think the obvious things, like people are like, oh, that pays a lot. This does this, and for some reason, like for some people, like that may be a deep intrinsic motivator. It may be like, I really just want to make a ton of money and I'll do anything that makes a ton of money. I don't think that's most people. Does that make sense? Like, I do believe there are people that is like their thing, and like they're going to get in and like they need to go to Wall Street or like whatever. Like, but I don't think that's most people. And whether it's a cause, whether it's purpose, whether it's helping people, whether it's continuing to serve your nation, if it's kids, if it's dogs, if it's ducks, I think figuring out what it is that like you're just going to show up. You wake up, you're on the right track when you wake up and you're not having a great day and you can't wait to get to work. Like that to me, at least in terms of the career side of your transition, your employment side of transition, which I want to be clear, I think is one of many factors to a service member's transition that needs to be done to the best of your ability, but is only one facet, right? There are a lot of things that I don't think we're talking about in terms of people's transition from the military that I think are as important, if not more important. We're hyper focused on employment. But then second to that is probably education and post 9/11 GI Bill. Third to that is probably like, I don't know, VA benefits. And way down the list, we're not really talking about maintaining your warrior readiness, not drinking yourself stupid. What is your relationship with whether it be your spouse, your girlfriend, making sure you're surrounding yourselves with good friends that aren't drinking themselves stupid. There are these really other, I think, people-based items that we need to do a better job talking about and making sure that, taking stock of where those relationships are. You surrounding yourself with people who are trying to make you a better you, or every day trying to make yourself a better version of yourself and taking care of the people around you.
I think that honestly, that's the stuff that you just mentioned is the part of the military transition that I'm most interested in, because I think people just talk about jobs because talking about six-figure salaries is sexy for a group of people that are underpaid for what they do. And so I think that what you're bringing up is so incredibly important because it's really I believe that in the military, we automatically associate this sense of purpose and all of these different facets of our life with our job because it's all nicely bundled together in one package. And I like to think of it as like one of those like obelisks or monoliths that's in Washington D.C. And
Yeah.
then I think of the post-military life as this mosaic or this like stained glass painting where there's all these there's many different pieces. Some pieces are bigger than others, but they're all disconnected and they create something whole. And the problem that is not being talked about in the military transition space is that if like employment for the most part is one very small piece of your entire in a very small piece of a life well lived. And if you're laser focused on VA benefits and getting a job, that's all you think about, you're going to get out and have a significant portion of your life missing that you don't even, if you never even thought about it, you won't even know why you're sad or unfulfilled. And I think it's a disservice that we do to our veterans because I just don't think we talk about it nearly enough. And I think that we don't talk about it because it just doesn't sound good on LinkedIn or wherever it is because people don't like to get real. It's not as fun. It's not as fun as talking about getting rich.
I think you can always try to be the best at whatever you do. Hopefully, in being the best in whatever you do, there's some economic benefits or anything of that nature that kind of come along with that. But I think, and I think most incredibly rich people would agree with this statement that at some juncture, the financial picture just
Disappears.
it just doesn't matter as much. And I think the real answer is that it matters, right? It does matter. Like finances matter, but they're one bucket, right? Like, because you can also have a great job. I know some of these men and women, they have a great job and they spend all their money. They're like in debt, like, and then their relationships are strained because of debt or because they can't pull it together and then they end up in a divorce or whatever. And finances are certainly a part of that bucket. Having a job that is meaningful and gives you purpose is certainly part of the equation. Maintaining your physical readiness, right? Like we have a saying, or at least amongst some of us here in the veteran policy space, we have a system that encourages you to be as strong as you can possibly be, to be all you can be, right? Warrior for life, Marine for life, until the day you get out of the military. And then we have a system that encourages you or incentivizes being as sick or broken as you can possibly be for veteran benefits, unemployability, whatever. I would argue it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. I think figuring out what it is that is going to continue to make you physically healthy and making sure you're checking in and trying to lead a life of purpose, clear-headedness as best as you can, and being cognizant of those around you. We've got to be honest. And the military and I think a lot of generals agree with this, we have a drinking problem. And that is having a huge effect on mental stability, on our families, our loved ones. And I think we've got to be very cognizant and real with that. It's something I've struggled with. And I know it's something that a lot of the men and women in the military have struggled with. And we have to have that conversation. But beyond that, I think we've got to do a better job of talking to young men and women in service or transitioning out of the service. What are the core components you have to keep an eye on to really live a happy, healthy life? Because the military, especially if you're younger and in the military, they should be incredible days that you're going to remember for the rest of your life. You're never going to forget the men and women who you served with. You're never going to forget the situations that you were in and the things that happened. But they probably shouldn't be your best days. They probably just should not be your best days. Like, I'm not looking back on my 17 to 21-year-old Navy endless Westpac days as being the best days of my life. They're not.
It'd be kind of sad to say I peaked at 19. So,
right. And so how do you take that? And I see so many young men and women that are acting like who's the high school dude in Napoleon Dynamite.
Oh, yeah, I know you're talking about. Yeah.
It could be.
I don't remember their name, but yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Or it's like the old cliche, right? Like the high school football player that was like the dude, but then just, these should not be your best days. They should be incredible days of meaning, brotherhood, sisterhood, serving your nation. But it really should be with struggle, without struggle, whatever your service was, it should be the building block or the building blocks for you to continue your physical well-being, your contribution to your country. And I feel like and I don't understand it, I'll be honest with you. I don't understand why we set the bar so low for being a veteran. It's like, veteran. It's like, what? Like, like I was honored to serve. Like I knew the whole time, like in my teen years, like that I wanted to be in the military because all my uncles served, my grandparents served, because I saw the stories, the camaraderie. They didn't talk about what they were getting from the VA or wanted from the VA or wanted from our country. They were just proud to have served their nation. And then they went on to continue serving. And I think we need to have a bigger conversation about what are our expectations of the service members after service. Like, I think it should be kick butt, keep yourself physically in the best shape you can, because you're a warrior. I'm a sailor. You're a warrior, Billy.
Cyber warrior. That's it.
but
Keyboard warrior.
and how do you continue to contribute to make
Yeah.
our country better, to not drop into this morass of kicking the hell out of each other because you're from the Midwest and I'm from the city and we see the world differently. Like, we got a country to protect. And there's a lot going on in this world for all the domestic craziness we see going on right now. And who better to be the leaders right now than those of us who served in the military? I don't really remember talking too much about politics, but I was just a dumb and enlisted young kid. It was just about service. And from there, it was a building block. And now I think it's about finding ways to continue to give back and to continue to become a better version of myself, but also to help those behind me and to continue to find ways to try to make overall our country a better place and at minimum not be a part of the issues as best I can.
I love that you keep referring to. I love the idea of thinking about how your time in the military should be great days, but they shouldn't be your best days. And I love that you refer to your time in the military as a building block. And I think that if somebody is able to ground their identity in values that are above, that transcend the service, then they are able to use their military service as a springboard into the next chapter of their life. However, if their military service is their purpose, then exiting the service, that last chapter of their life suddenly becomes an anchor that holds them down versus being this amazing bridge into whatever they do next. And I think that the problem that we have right now for veterans is we are not helping people build that, what you talked about at the beginning, purpose, that holistic set of values that aren't just get a job, get paid. It's all of this soft, squishy stuff of who are you? What are the values you gravitate towards? What are those things that understanding that those values exist outside of the military as well. You just have to go find the manifestation of those values in your job, your hobbies, your service, whatever those things are, and then go pursue those things. But people too regularly go, oh, I had purpose because I was in the military, and that's it. Like, it's a very surface level observation, and we don't do a good job of training people to dig into that statement and say, well, what does the service really mean? Like, what were you really getting from it? And now let's talk about how you can go find it in the next chapter of your life, because it exists. It exists out there. People just don't feel like it because they don't ask the deep questions. They just go, well, I had value in the military and now I'm out of the military, so I don't have value anymore. And that's a very depressing and very shallow way to look at your life. But we don't help people view it any deeper than that. And that's it. And that's the sad part. And that's, I think, the thing that holds so many veterans back from being truly exceptional members of society post-military service.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think part of the other challenge is that just it's transition is always difficult, right? Change is always difficult. But we shouldn't put a band-aid on struggle either, right? Like, I think we're constantly trying to put band-aids on struggle. And this could be on something small well, I wouldn't argue transition out of the military is small, but I would argue it's temporary, right? To view the situation as, if you view the situation as temporary, if you know that everybody who's gone through it before you shared the suck, right? It's like, I don't know, it's like boot camp. But I don't think too many people are going to be like, oh, it was like great. Like it's just, in some ways it's reverse boot camp, right? It may not be that structured. It's far more ambiguous because you don't know necessarily where it's going, and that creates stress, right? But I think there are some things that you can do in that process, in any transition and process, to kind of help you through that. And one is, don't drink and party your way through it, right? Like, because that's not going to help you. And I've seen a lot of young service members do that, right? They're like, oh, I don't know where the hell I'm going. I'm just going to, I got all this money, because I was deployed. And if you don't have a plan, I think try to sit in it as clear-headed as you can, right? Work at it and ask yourself tough questions. And then as clear-headed as you can, start to build up, I think some people that really matter to you. I think so often in this process, we don't talk about, as I've already said, the people side of this issue. It's very much just like once they get a job, they're off and running and the job matters. And don't get me wrong, if you don't get a job for a long time, I know it seems like you're broken or whatever. And we can talk about that maybe some more in a minute. But I think anytime you're going through a transition, really take stock of who are the people in your corner. Who are the people that you can lean on or that have your back. And if you don't feel like you have that corner, take note of that too, right? Like, that's important. And hey, I've been there. I know how that feels like to feel like nobody's there. But really dig. I'll bet somebody's there. If you really dig, I'll bet somebody's there. But if they're not, get after it. Start thinking about who are the people that I want to build up and put in my corner. And those people matter because when times are rough, when things don't seem like they're going the right way, those are the people you want to lean into and start talking to about, hey, here's where I'm at. I need your advice in terms of where to go, how to do things, whatever it may be. But a lot of folks say, or I hear a lot more people saying this, but I've heard it from some pretty good people that I agree with too. And they say you kind of tend to become the average of the 5 to 10 people you really surround yourself with. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think starting to really think about, again, building up that network, who are you surrounding yourself with? How are you tackling your problems? And then just working at every day, trying to make every day a little bit better. And I think accepting the day for what it is, right? Like, I think there's a lot of, we can also create like too much anxiety in ourselves. And I think just recognizing a few facts. One is, if you're a United States military service member, honorably discharging out of the military, you're in a dang good place relative to, it may not feel like it. You're like, I don't have a job. I don't know what the heck I'm doing. But overall, our country is not more supportive of any other status in the country. For the most part, you got VA healthcare, which some people talk it up, talk it down, whatever. I'd say it depends. But for the most part, like, hey, you've got healthcare probably covered. You've got a GI Bill, a post 9/11 GI Bill that is on par, if not better than the star athletes scholarship at whatever school you're going to. I don't know now that they get paid money. But
Yeah, that is true. Those likeness rights that's a game changer for sure.
Yeah. Prior to that, I feel like that was this true statement. And beyond that, I think you have the gratitude of so many other programs. Some I would argue, like too many, I would argue. Anybody can call me up and we can argue over that. But the point being, overall, I think just taking stock of the idea that your personal situation, like, you're in a pretty good place probably. And now you just need to put some thought into how and where am I going to go with this, and not crushing yourself with anxiety and stress, and just kind of taking it one day at a time as best you can.
I love what you said. I'm going to tie in something that you said at the end, something you said at the beginning, which is first recognizing that transition is temporary. And I believe that part of realizing that transition is temporary is recognizing and having gratitude for the good place that you're starting at in your transition. I think the time that you run into issues is if people are unable or unwilling to view those benefits and don't do the work to view their passions and values outside of the military, then they're going to think, I'm just going to leave. Like, if my value is the military, then I'm never going to find something better than that. And it goes back to what you said before. Like, if someone views the military as the greatest days of their life, then that's that's really scary and really sad. But if you can move past that, view your values external to the military, and recognize that you're in a really good starting spot, then is the military transition going to be easy? It won't be like a cakewalk, but it's definitely something that will eventually end, and you'll be in a better place for it. So I think that's amazing advice. But going back to your story, because we went off on a tangent. What happens
Jumped right
after?
into it.
I know, right? I love it. It's great. You're passionate about it, and it shows, and I love that. So after you graduate from the University of Utah, or is it Utah University? What is the
University of Utah. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
What happens next in your life?
Yeah. So I was thinking of, like, throwing in some Ohio State Rose Bowl references, but it didn't work out
That's
very
hurtful.
well for us. Yeah. So no, you guys won. So
Yeah, I know.
yeah, it was painful on my end, but
Sorry.
it's okay. Yeah. So graduated from the University of Utah, and I got the opportunity to come to Washington D.C. And I did an internship with the House Foreign Affairs Committee, which was pretty crazy, going from being a third class petty officer to sitting on the sidelines as General David Petraeus is making his argument for the surge in Afghanistan and Iraq during just it's pretty nuts. And when I got to Washington, D.C., I pretty much, well, preceding DC, I had sold everything I'd owned. I had a young daughter. She was a baby and soon to be wife, and sold everything I owned to move to this city that I'd never even been to. I don't think I'd been any farther east than, I don't know, maybe Mississippi or something on a trip with my uncle. But I knew it was a really excellent opportunity. And I guess in some ways, begetting my previous point of really trying to go after and find something specific, I think you can also position yourself to where you get in a situation where you get opportunities presented to you that just kind of blow your mind or kind of beyond what you were even thinking about. And for me, to back up a little bit, I saw an opportunity to become an intern for the University of Utah's president. And I thought there's no way in hell I'm going to get this thing, but yeah, I'll apply for it. I was running the VFW in Salt Lake City, Utah at the time. I was the youngest. I ended up being the youngest All-American post commander of the VFW. And I was the youngest person in Utah with a liquor license. So
Hey, that's a great, especially in that state. That's an impressive title to hold.
There's not a lot of liquor licenses in Utah,
No.
but it was a fun college experience. But that kind of helped situate myself, I think, getting involved in the community, getting involved in veteran issues. And then I did a work study with the American Legion, which was really how I initially got involved in the veteran space. I just saw a sign walking through school one day and it said, "Are you a veteran?" And I was like, "I think so." And, like, honestly, I didn't even know, I wasn't even thinking like that. "Are you a veteran?" And then the second thing was like, "Do you need a job?" And I was like, "I definitely need a job." And then there's just a number. It's just a white piece of paper. This is nothing fancy. So I call it, and it's the American Legion, and it's a work study. So that's kind of how I started well in school, I think, applying myself. But what I realized in that situation was how much I fundamentally cared about our generation, and how much I genuinely cared that I knew we had big problems and issues coming. And it was because I started seeing, frankly, the men, mostly men, who, had fought a war that I also went to, but like, it was not the same war. I was on a ship, way, like, I didn't shoot at anybody. I never fired a weapon. When I backed up and thought about the fact that, like, you went into this situation like 3 times for a long time, and like, you didn't see shit, like nothing happened. But then I started to see, because of my proximity in this role, I was seeing kids that I went to high school with, and they were having real challenges and struggles. And I felt compelled that I could help out in some way. So I stayed dedicated to just trying to play my part. My uncles drugged me into the VFW, which they'd all run before. And then I took this internship with the president of the University of Utah, and it gets me out to Washington, D.C. on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. I work for a junior member of Congress who was the highest ranking military officer, admiral, 3-star admiral, to ever be a member of Congress at that time. There's now a 3-star general in office right now, Jack Bergman, a Marine general from Michigan. Incredible guy. I worked for this admiral for like, I don't know, 3 months. And then the VFW, based on my experience you never know when kind of laying these seeds is going to work out. And because of my experience with the VFW, having volunteered and run a post, and I knew what the VFW was. At that time, there was no post 9/11. We'd had no post 9/11 advocate at the big level for any of the veteran groups. And I became the first post 9/11 lobbyist for any of the major veteran groups, and went to work on the post 9/11 GI Bill, and we saw the gap. We saw the kids that didn't go back to Utah, who weren't fortunate to have low tuition costs, that were struggling in New York or Jersey or California or Texas. They weren't situating our community to really possibly become the best version of themselves. And so I didn't know what the hell I was doing as a baby. I can send you pictures. I look like a baby, and it's like me. And then we've got, in fairness, some other really incredible advocates. I think it ended up being about 5 or 6 of us that were really kind of the ones doing the day-to-day grind and meetings and going to all these things. And then really probably, I don't know, about 10 lawmakers. But the big ones were Jim Webb, who introduced the bill, and then Chuck Hagel, who I'm still very close friends with, and he's actually the chair of the nonprofit that I founded. He's the chair of our board. And then they were both Vietnam veterans, Democrat and Republican. And then you had 2 World War II veterans, and Senator Frank Lautenberg, he was the Dem, and then Senator John Warner, who was the lead Republican. And after we passed post 9/11 GI Bill, I was on the elevator with John Warner. We're coming down, and he's like, that was the most important thing that I've done in my life. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, I don't know, I'm probably 25, 26. I'm like, well, damn, what the hell am I?
Did I just
like,
peak at 25?
yeah, is that it?
Yeah.
I was like, this guy dated Liz Taylor. This guy married Liz Taylor. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know, man. Like,
no, that's a wild thing to have someone of that importance say to you at 25 years old. Like, that's nuts. Especially with that kind of political career as well, to be like, that was it. Like, you just watch me hit my mountaintop.
That's right. Yeah. And these elevators are tiny. If you're in DC, I'll take you on a ride sometime. It's like being in like an English phone booth or something with buttons. But I think it was important because it did relay to me the idea and the significance of how big this thing was going to be. And that this guy was wise enough. He couldn't not believe me. He didn't have any reason to lie to me, like zero, right? And just at the beginning of this year, I don't know, January 8th or so, Student Veterans of America invited myself and Secretary Chuck Hagel to do a fireside chat and talk about the legacy of the post 9/11 GI Bill. And the room is packed, and we're at Disney World, and there's just thousands of veterans. And when you think about, frankly, the impact that bill has had, it is incredible. And so, if you haven't used that, figure it out and use it on a really expensive school. But yeah. So, anyways, that one thing led to the other. I was with VFW for a little over 3 years. Kind of saw the writing on the wall that we weren't going to be. It was a very expensive bill. I knew we weren't going to be passing many more really large pieces of legislation, and then went over to the VA, did congressional affairs there for a little over 3 years, and then had the opportunity to come back to Capitol Hill, and I became the staff director ended up being the staff director for two of the subcommittees on the House Veterans Affairs Committee. So I had about probably a little over half of the entire VA budget under my oversight as the lead senior professional staff member. And then, I feel like I'm just giving you my resume.
Oh, no, it's good. I like it. So what was the genesis at that point for HillVets?
Yeah, so with HillVets, it was really, I guess the best way to explain it would be that I really just had made the observation that there were all these incredible men and women in Washington, D.C., but like everybody had an agenda, right? Like everybody was very specifically oriented and focused on this or that, or they were with this group, or they were at the Pentagon or at the VA or working on Capitol Hill. And in some ways it was a riff. I'm not going to lie. There was this staff group, and it's kind of funny because every once in a while, every couple of years, somebody comes up to me with this idea of, what if we just created a group for congressional staffers who are veterans? And that existed, but like they were super insular, right? They were like, no, just us. But there was only like 5 of them. And they were they could never get this thing off the ground. And of course that fails. And I was like, what if we take that, but just like open up the spigot, like all are welcome. Like it's like veterans on the Hill. And I'm telling you, like, I hated the name at first. I was like, HillVets, it sounds so obvious. And like, maybe it needs to be like meta for, like what's the, we got to come up with something crazy.
Some cool name. Yeah.
Yeah. It's nobody really knows until they know. And finally, like, I think we just gave up. Like, we were like, all right.
I guess HillVets is it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then what's funny about it is people are like, the branding is so great. And I'm like, all right, I guess
you're like, you're right. I totally wanted this the entire time.
Yeah, and I can share the logos with you too. Like I'm gonna post those someday because they just like went from horrible to worse to like, and now we love our logo, and we've had it for like a really long time. But yeah, it really just started because we saw that nobody was really fundamentally bringing everyone together. And that's what we really struck out to do. And I got a bunch of folks together and asked them for emails and put together kind of an initial email list. And then I rolled into this Capitol Hill hunt called Bull Feathers and met with the lead person there. And I was like, hey, we're just trying to have a happy hour with vets, not knowing that the owner himself, Tony, who actually I just saw like I don't know, 10 days ago or something. Older vet. He's definitely maybe even like pre-Vietnam. Great guy, but not even knowing this person and knowing that the guy's a veteran. And we roll in there day of thinking we're just going to have like the end of the bar. And they had literally set aside like free event space, which just doesn't happen in DC. And like even threw in like some free stuff. And that was initially how we started HillVets. And you fast forward to today, we have a gorgeous townhouse right on Capitol Hill. We house up to 8 veterans at any given time for men and women who are trying to get their start on the Hill. Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Green Party, we don't care. And we try to help. We help those men and women get their first fellowship and then ultimately a job, usually somewhere here in DC, whether it be on the Hill or in one of the federal agencies. And then we have a leadership program and we do a bunch of events, and we do the HillVets 100, which is really the award ceremony, I would argue, for the veteran and military community. Yeah, it's grown pretty substantially, and we've helped a lot of veterans. And really, I see HillVets as the community for veterans who are really in the DC and or political policy space. We have a lot of veterans who are engaged who aren't necessarily in DC. And maybe we have one guy who's in Puerto Rico. He was just in our leadership program and, now has a whole new community at his fingertips because he went through our leadership program and makes it into DC when he can and when we're doing things. And we have other folks who make the trip or drive in or fly in and then go home to their communities. But I think it's just proven to be incredibly valuable for those men and women who want to continue serving their nation in policy, politics, government service, and that type of thing.
That's really cool. What would your biggest piece of advice be for veterans who are interested in getting involved at any level of government, like federal, state, local? I don't know how much experience you have with state and local, but what would be your biggest piece of advice for someone who's interested in that?
Yeah, I think just figuring out. My memory flashes to Senator Orrin Hatch when I told him I was going to Washington, D.C. And he was a very long-term senator from Utah. If you're familiar with the Hatch Act, that's literally Senator Orrin Hatch. And his best friend was probably Senator Ted Kennedy. They were great friends across the aisle. But yeah, he was in kind of hot water when I met with him, told him I was going to DC, a city I'd never been in. And he was like, Justin, just make lots of friends and don't believe the press. The press was beating him up right then. So I don't know if it was specific to his situation, but certainly the make friends part makes a lot of sense to me. And I think our country is at a real crossroads right now in terms of everything that we see going on across the globe. Conflict is extremely high. Resources are only becoming more scarce. We've got a lot of challenges across the globe. And you look at our country domestically, and we're really kind of kicking each other's butt. I think trying to figure out a way to be more constructive and less critical in terms of your involvement and really leading the way, right? Like, to me, like, I'll always be a Navy veteran before I'm part of any party. And I think trying to have that mindset and going into public service is incredibly important. And I've seen it from the best of our public servants who have military service. So that's one piece of advice. I don't know if that's the best piece of advice in terms of getting started, but I think in terms of what our country needs right now is it doesn't need more partisan. I don't even want to tie it to the military it doesn't need a bunch of hyper partisan Rambos. It needs people who want to make our country better, who want to build it up and figure out ways to make our country stronger, because we have real enemies and it's not each other. It's China, it's Russia, and these countries they're not democracies. They're doing whatever they need to do. And there's no luxury of public debate going on over there. They're just getting ready. And meanwhile, we're over here just like kicking the crap out of each other. So I'm saying all that to say that's the mindset I think you need to have. If you don't want to make your country better, then, you're in the wrong business. And part of that is understanding that you're probably not going to see the world that if you live in rural West Virginia, you're probably not going to see the world the same as somebody that lives in New York City. That to me is not a problem. I think the problem is how we are castigating each other, how we're labeling each other, how we're acting like being one from one party or the other is like as criminal or yeah, that's ridiculous. We've had different views for forever. And I think a lot of it honestly does come down to like, are you in a metro? Are you rural? What are the realities of your life? And I think if we can step back and be more compassionate for each other and realize that we're just not going to see the world the same way. And it's because we have different struggles sitting right in front of us, right? Like they're just different things that are affecting our daily life and experience that is going to give us a different worldview. But with that, we got to find commonality. And frankly, we have some very common enemies. Like they don't care if we're Democrat or Republican. They're happy watching us beat the crap out of each other because it's wasting energy, right? It's wasting energy that could be spent on making our country a better place for all of us and making our country stronger, so on and so forth. And there will be things that we never completely agree on. And if we accept that, as far as getting involved, I think the best thing to do is to just think about what that means for you. And I think elections are a great way to kind of get a start and to get a feel for politics. If policy is more the angle you're looking for, I think trying to reach out to either local state reps or house reps, they're always looking for help. They're starving for help. Those folks don't really have budgets. If it's a cause, I think really just reaching out to nonprofits, whatever you're interested in. Maybe that's your 5 and 5 right there. If it's like, I want to save, the spotted owl, or you can go to Wall Street and, Wolf of Wall Street, your way to the spotted owl.
Yeah. You've used bird analogies a lot. Are you a bird? Are you like a bird person?
Birder.
Ornithologist secretly on
like maybe I'm picking on the birds. But for me, I'm wearing it. Like I'm veterans. I love veterans, but I also love climbing. And so I'm on the board of this organization, the Access Fund, which is the largest climbing nonprofit in the country. I got involved with that by just reaching out to them and just saying, hey, maybe I can help you guys. Here's what I do. And really just started helping them and helped them for numerous years. And then eventually they were like, hey, why don't you help us by joining our board? And so a lot of it, I think, is just reaching out. I think one last piece of advice, and I might be advised out, but is that I feel like a lot of folks are scared of hearing no. And you gotta go for it. You're gonna get no's. You're gonna get no's. Get through the no's to get to the yes. And I think that taking that pathway and that mindset, if you have that, then you're going to situate yourself well to be able to find opportunity.
Being willing to try things and be rejected and then learn from that is incredibly important. And I think that all the advice that you've given has been amazing. I definitely think that it's your message to reach across the aisle, have the conversations with people regardless of their beliefs, and work together to make this country a better place is an incredibly important thing for people to hear, because it is vitally important for us to get that as we move forward in history. And so, yeah, I do appreciate that advice.
And Billy, along those lines, I would say we are the result of that. Our generation was gifted, right? The post 9/11 GI Bill, like that would not have happened if it was not for our brightest, most wise United States senators who were military veterans from both parties. That's why that happened.
Yeah.
And if you look at our current generation, like we don't really have much of that. We don't have very many senior political leaders who are also military veterans. And we can't fix that immediately, like right now. But I think we can embody those same principles, right? We can rise above the fray and try to be, yeah, we have our opinion. Yeah, we have our politics. But what do we put first and how do we treat people? And that matters.
I completely agree. And I think that's an awesome, awesome piece of advice. I'm really curious about where you think organizations like the American Legion and the VFW have in future, like future, like veteran affairs, because I feel like my generation of veteran, we just don't participate as much. I could be wrong, but I do think that they're important. I'm curious how you feel what place they have moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I got involved in the VFW pretty early in my transition. And for me, I feel incredibly fortunate that I did. And I think that the challenge for a lot of veterans now is that when I did that, it was like 2004. All these almost mostly men. There were a few women. And there were certainly a lot of auxiliary women that I think also really were incredible. But I think what was great for me was it did give me exposure to so many men from previous generations of war. And I've heard a lot of people imply or suggest that, like, oh, they told me whatever to do, or there was these generational conflicts. And there was some of that. Like, I'm not going to lie, for me, we didn't always see eye to eye. But I've got a running joke. Maybe it's only like amongst me and one other friend, but it was like, man, if you can get something passed through the VFW post, like,
It'll fly anywhere.
you're on your way. Like, but I think it really helped me think about compromise and working with others and trying to make the sell and trying to make the pitch. I learned so much from being able to have the opportunity to run Salt Lake City post 3586 VFW in Utah. But I continue to see how much value these national organizations actually really do provide our generation of veteran. I think the challenge is that a lot of them ask young men and women for two things they don't have a lot of early on, and that's time and money. I think it's just incredibly difficult especially if you're in your 20s and 30s, you got a young family, you're trying to get your feet under you, and you're trying to probably do school and got this whole career thing. And there's just a lot of stresses, right? And so I think they're struggling with how to deal with all that. But my fear is I do know how much value they've provided our community over time in terms of, especially politically, and that all that groundwork, and it was a lot of groundwork, and it was a lot of years of numerous generations of war veterans. So I think we at least need to be mindful of that. And my general recommendation is, look, pick one. Become a lifetime member if you can. If you can't afford it at first, just do an annual and be involved in some way. Try to figure out some way to make sure you're involved with, I think, one of the traditional groups. And then if one of the other ones, is interesting to you, I think our generation has been very good at kind of creating kind of more niche specialty groups, right? And I think those really have a purpose too. What I love about those is they tend to be very proactive. Like, you want to go to disasters and give back, Team Rubicon. You want to run and be a veteran, Team Red, White, and Blue, or there are a few of those. You want to be into politics and be a veteran, HillVets. And I think those are important communities as well. But I'll be honest with you, at least with HillVets, and I know some of the other nonprofits, Student Veterans of America, they would all say the same thing. Those organizations helped us get off the ground and continue to help us today. I mean, DAV, VFW, they've continued to monetarily support HillVets. And I know they support other organizations also. And even groups like Vietnam Veterans of America, they give HillVets money. So I think just thinking about the bigger picture, I think is important for our generation of veteran. And on the flip side of that, with our traditional veteran groups, I think understanding that maybe our generation just needs a little more time.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, Justin, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and really dive into issues that I believe are incredibly important. It's amazing to hear that you think the same thing, to be open and to be bold with what you're saying. I think that people need to hear it, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and talk about it for an hour and 36 minutes. It's a long time to be pouring out fantastic advice, but by golly, you did it, and I'm very grateful for you for doing so.
Awesome, Billy. Well, I hope to see you soon. If you're out in the DC area, let me know.
I definitely will.
I know you're probably out in California. They all move to Utah eventually. So
Yeah.
if,
It'll happen. If not there, Montana. And then, we can link up on a rock wall somewhere, and it'll be great.
Sounds good, man.
Awesome. And for everybody out there, thank you so much for watching another episode of the Post-Military Podcast. If you are interested in politics and like the idea of HillVets, their resources will be linked down in the comments. So please go check them out. Go support them on all of their social media. And if you like this episode and want to support us, like and subscribe as well. And we will catch you on the next episode of the Post-Military Podcast. Peace.